Major support for these broadcasts is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, All Nation Renovation, Ackman Ziff Real Estate Group, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Eastern Consolidated, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors LLC, Genova, Burns and GIANTOMASI, Goldman Properties, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. KUHN Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Corming Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Newmark Knight Frank, RAL Development Services, The Spandrel Group, LLC, Site Comply, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Triangle Equities, the WITKOFF Group, Urban American.
New York City has some interesting people. People who've been involved with relocating people throughout the city, you know, from lower Manhattan to upper Manhattan. And, you know, they're involved with the real estate market in every aspect. Today, I'm fortunate to have the chairman of the tri-state region of Cassidy Turley, my friend Mark Boisi here. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
You know, let's talk how you got into the real estate business. I mean, you're one of 6 children, you know, and you and many of your brothers and sisters went to Boston College. But the reality is that it all really started, and we got to talk about your dad.
I'd love to.
Okay, tell me about your dad, who fortunately is like 93 years of age today.
Correct.
Who was born in the Lower East Side. So tell me about your dad.
My dad was a pretty unique individual. He had a great impact on my life and the lives of his children. And he was a kid that grew up on the Lower East Side of New York City.
Lost his father at a very young age.
Lost his father. Actually, his father was gassed in World War I and was brought back to New York, and a couple of years later he passed away. So he really didn't know his dad. And he had to work his whole life, you know, helping his mother out. He went to public school in New York City.
Went to Brooklyn College, part of the city
Went
university.
to Brooklyn College, then made his way to Fordham Law School. He was a very bright guy, very facile with numbers. And he ended up getting a job at a law firm called Almond & Almond back in the 40s, I guess. And, you know, his entry into real estate was through Bill Zeckendorf Sr.,
Right.
not
so
Junior.
Almond & Almond is a small firm
Right.
having this guy by the name of Bill Zeckendorf, who literally was a visionary. There was no question. I mean, Bill Zeckendorf was responsible for the land where the UN is. Bill Zeckendorf was development for everything. And all of a sudden, this young attorney, okay, who grew up in the Lower East Side, now gets a job with this.
Well, he's representing him on behalf of his firm.
Right.
But that's how he cut his teeth in the real estate business. And, you know, my old man was telling stories about being in Bill Zeckendorf's office on the top of 383 Madison Avenue, and he would control the atmosphere of the room by pressing buttons underneath his desk. And if he wanted a mood that was red, you know, he'd press a red button, and all of a sudden the red lights would come on. And this is how he'd negotiate transactions.
So how did he move from Almond & Almond to the New York Central Railroad Company?
Well, the railroad was looking for somebody with real estate expertise to help them with their real estate portfolio. They had an extensive real estate portfolio.
Now, very few people realize, I mean, because it goes back into the early 50s, that New York Central owned all the land. Tell me some of the land that they own. They own all the land
Well,
on Park Avenue.
Well, because it's a railroad and it's under Park Avenue, they own all the land from the railroad tracks up into the sky, which pierces Park Avenue. They owned Grand Central's terminal. They owned all the hotels surrounding, you know, the Biltmore, the Roosevelt, et cetera, and back in the day in the 50s and 60s. They owned all the land up and down Park Avenue. The land on Park Avenue was actually occupied by residential buildings, as you know, many years ago.
Yeah, but at that time, the Waldorf was built in the early 30s, so they owned the land under the Waldorf.
Correct, they did, and they own the hotel. And what my dad did was he came up with the idea, because the railroad was undergoing some financial crisis at the time, was if the highest and best use for Park Avenue was really office buildings as opposed to residential buildings. So he came up with the idea of basically transitioning all of Park Avenue from residence to office. So he was dealing with, he did actually the Pan Am building at 200 Park Avenue with Irving Wilson.
Irving Wilson was a visionary, and your dad was involved because the Pan Am building was built on New York Central land.
Correct. So he did it with Sig Summer. He did it with Stanley Stahl. He did it with the Rudins,
but Stanley,
the Uris family.
Okay, but Stanley Stahl really has an influential impact on your life, because, and I think we'll tell the Stanley Stahl story, because as you were saying, you know, when you're growing up, you know, with 6, you know, brothers and sisters, you know, at the dinner table, the discussion was real estate.
It was real estate. Larry Fisher did this, and Stanley Stahl did that, and I made these guys millionaires. That's what I was hearing day in and day out.
But what happens is Stanley Stahl was a grocer originally in Brooklyn, and his father, and then he becomes a real estate broker, and their real money came that they owned the theater with.
Well, actually, I think he and his dad, I believe, bought the Lunt-Fontanne Theater, and you know, theaters are predicated upon having good shows and long-standing shows. Well, it was their good fortune that a small show by the name of My Fair Lady had the longest-running show in the history of New York theater, and they made a fair amount of money. And Stanley wanted to put that money to work in real estate.
So Stanley Stahl, who at this time owned some real estate, who was a real estate broker, comes to your father, who's the man in charge of real estate for New York Central. And what happens?
Well, Dad was trying to find a developer for the site underneath 277 Park. So he sent out a nickel postcard to several developers and sent one to Stanley Stahl as a real estate person. And Stanley goes up to my dad's office and says, Mr. Boisi, I'd like to build the office tower there. It's going to be a 1.5 foot building, and I want it to 50 stories. I'd like to build that. I have the capital. I have the financial wherewithal. And my dad asked him one question. He said, it's great that you've got the capital, but what have you built? Stanley looked at him and he says, well, I haven't built anything. So Dad was like, thank you, Mr. Stahl. We'll see you next time. Well, about 3 weeks later, my dad gets a phone call, and it's Stanley Stahl. And Stanley says, can I come up and see you? And my dad goes, well, why do you want to come up? We've already had this conversation. He says, just let me come up and see you. So he goes up and he sees my dad, and he looks him in the eye, and he goes, Mr. Boisi, let me ask you a question. And Dad goes, what? He goes, is 50 years of construction experience enough for you, for me to build that building on Park Avenue? My dad said, yeah, sure. How'd you do that? He says, well, I just bought Caldwell Wingate, which at that time, and still is, one of the greatest construction companies the city's ever seen. They helped build the Midtown Tunnel, you know, courthouses downtown, municipal buildings. They were quite a firm.
And basically, your dad allows him to build
277 Park Avenue, which I am the agent for today on behalf of the Stahl organization.
So that's why I'm bringing out all the situation. And subsequently, your dad retires from New York Central. He goes to work for J.P. Morgan as a
Morgan Guarantee, J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan as a vice president in construction, and retires later on as the vice chairman.
Yes.
Not bad for a guy like that. And then subsequently works for the legendary Harry Hemsley. You told me you were born in Lenox Hill Hospital, I think.
No, I was born in St. Vincent's, which is coming down.
Right, you were born in St. Vincent's, but the doctor who delivered you delivered...
Dr. Hardart, of Horn and Hardart fame.
Right. Had delivered...
Delivered my 3 kids.
It delivered your 3 kids.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Long Island. You went to
Chaminade High School.
right,
Mineola.
and then you went to, you followed your brother.
Yes.
You went to Boston
Yes,
College.
I did. My sister
And
went there.
you really said, hey, I've learned real estate. I've gained insight on real estate. I want to get into the real estate business. So while you're in college, in your third year of college, this summer, you get a job at this legendary firm, Cross and what?
Cross and Brown Company.
Tell me, what was Cross and
Cross
Brown?
and Brown was one of the finest real estate service organizations in the city. As a matter of fact, back in the early 70s, this was 1974, there were only two basic real estate firms in the city. It was Cushman & Wakefield and Cross and Brown, and they dominated the city scene. They managed all the buildings, they did all the tenant rep deals. So I was happy to get the interview at Cross and Brown. My father actually was able to get me an interview at several different law firms and several other places. But I had a real affinity for Dick Sealer, who hired me, and I ended up working on a team there with Bob Abrams, John Benish, and Steve Riker. And after about 2 or 3 years at Cross and Brown, those three gentlemen decided to leave and form their own firm. And they asked the young kid to come along with them, and I decided to do that.
And the interesting thing that people look at in the real estate, they say that, you know, you're a leasing broker or you're managing. I mean, you've done both. I mean,
Yeah, I like it, yeah.
Okay, and you've done a lot over there. And some of the buildings that you've managed have been which, the Chrysler building?
Well, actually, as luck would have it, when we formed our firm, we had the good fortune of having the management and leasing for the Seagram building and for the Chrysler building. Those were our first two accounts. And my partner of today, Bob Billingsley, my business partner of 35 years, and I were the two young guys who had to do the legwork. So Bob Abrams said, okay, guys, I'm going to flip a coin. One of you pick the Seagram building, and one of you pick this Chrysler building. I picked the Seagram building. So I ended up being the managing and leasing representative for the building for 10 years.
Even when it was sold to TIAA Criff.
It was sold from Seagram's to TIAA, and we had a hand in that, and John Benish helped orchestrate that. And I basically did leasing there for 10 years and met some incredible people, including Philip Johnson and, you know, the Four Seasons restaurant, who I ultimately represented against Teachers Insurance after we lost the agency 10 or 15 years later. We did that lease. And I ended up representing Seagram in a negotiation to renew their lease at the Seagram building when TIAA owned it.
But you guys did a lot of management.
We did. We had a significant amount of money. We had the Teachers Insurance and Association headquarters buildings at 733rd, 753rd, 45 Lex, Chrysler building, Seagram building, 10 East 53rd Street. The list goes on and on. We had millions of square feet. But we were a small boutique firm, you know, giving, you know, high quality service to our tenants, a real client focus. And we had maybe, I don't know, about 10 million square feet under management. And then we slowly built our tenant rep group. And we grew to about, I don't know, about 40 or 50 people by the mid-1980s, early 1990s. And we did some pretty interesting transactions, actually.
Which included?
Well, one of my largest transactions was actually in 1994. We negotiated Donaldson Levkin Jenret's headquarters
and as I said at the opening of the program, I mean, literally, you know, in the 80s or before 1990, mid-1990s, most companies, the financial service companies, were downtown.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, there was no one who was midtown.
Yeah.
They wanted to remain downtown. This is where the banks were. This is where the financial services industry. Well, so what happened with DLJ?
Well, there was economics too involved, and you know, there was always a disparity between the economics of being midtown and downtown, and so it was less costly to be downtown, and they usually had a serious, you know, employment pool. Well, if you recall, in the early 90s, there was something called a recession. So pricing in Midtown had really come down. When we did that original lease with DLJ, they took about 500,000 feet initially, and then about a year later, they took another 500,000. They moved to 277 Park. I brokered the deal with George Twill, a friend of mine, and who was working at DLJ at the time. You know, the rents were in the mid-30s, low 40s per square foot, which is, you know, today it's $100.
But even though there was a cost savings, I mean, a significant cost savings that go midtown, it was a change of concept for a brokerage firm
to be midtown.
To be midtown.
It's
I
true.
mean, that was
very true.
That was the situation. I mean, Now, was Chemical in the building at that time?
Well, Chemical Bank was the major tenant in the building, and also a firm by the name of Arthur Young, which is today Ernst & Young. Well, it just so happened that both of those leases expired at about the same time. So in 1993, it was going to cause 1.3 million square feet to become vacant. We had a deal out with J.P. Morgan, if you can believe it. I know it's weird in context of our discussion, but we had a lease out with J.P. Morgan in 1993 for 750,000 feet. Blew apart at the last minute. I picked up the phone, I called DOJ, and I was like, come on guys, come on up here and take a look at this. And with Stanley Stahl and George and myself and Richard Saja and Greg Walpert, we worked out the deal.
And what other major deals you were saying in the early 90s?
Well, in the early 90s?
No, over the years.
Well,
before we get to the UFT, we'll speak about the UFT separately.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of business for Scudder, Stevens & Clark. That was my first sort of big deal that I did on my own in the late 80s with the Rudin family. They were just terrific to work with. So I've done a significant amount of financial service companies up and down Park Avenue.
What's more interesting, which, you know, and I think this is what, you know, you've taken the direction a little further, is I'm not sure, I think it was in the 90s, you got involved with the equity fund, AEW. And what happened, let's talk about AEW and the involvement of you and your firm with regard to AEW.
Well, AEW has been a client of the firm's for over 25 years, and back in the late 90s, they decided they wanted to get into investments in the New York area, and they wanted a trusted advisor. At the time, we didn't really have an investment sales department, so I went to Mr. Stahl, actually, formed a partnership with him and our company, and we created a fund, a joint venture fund with AEW to purchase basically Class B and C properties and turn them around, value-add properties.
So what properties did you buy?
We bought, I don't know, about a half a dozen properties, including a 40% interest at 20 Broad Street. The other part was owned by Vornado. We bought 401 Fifth Avenue, actually from the Reverend Moon. My partner, Bob Billingsley, orchestrated that, and we purchased that property. We bought 3 Dog Hamajo Plaza, which we bought, I don't know, at the time was like about $150 a foot. We ended up condoing the building and then selling out at about
I didn't
400
you condoed.
Yeah, the Stahl, yeah, we sold them out. So we bought about, I don't know, about 8 or 9 properties, had a pretty good return.
But that was, and then Stanley passed on.
And Stanley passed, unfortunately, and then that was so successful that AEW asked us to do it, to have a second fund, which we did.
That's when you bought the building on 40th Street?
Yeah, 119 West 40th. We bought that property. We bought another property on West 28th Street,
West 28th Street.
Right across from FIT. And that was about a $50 million equity fund, and we did our splits with AEW and our partners at CABR at the time. And we purchased them, I don't know, for about $100 million, all those properties. We sold them, actually for $135 million, both properties. We bought them in 2006. We sold them in late 2007 for $235 million. So AEW and our fund made a fair amount.
So the guys who were in the leasing and management also got into the ownership business?
Yes, we did. We did. But we were working on behalf of a client. In both instances, we had AEW, which was a client, and Stahl was a client in the first instance. And we were staying away from the prime trophy assets that we do property management for. Our portfolio was mostly trophy assets, you know, headquarters buildings like for the UFT or MTA or Random House and JP Morgan Chase, et cetera. But these were Class B properties that needed some turnaround and leasing skills and management skills and some construction advice. And we repositioned the properties and sold them. So it wasn't really competing with our normal service business.
Now, let's talk specifically, because I think, you know, after the tragic events of 9/11, literally no one wanted to go to Lower Manhattan. I mean, Lower Manhattan, I still remember some of my early shows in 2001 when I would bring up the subject about relocation to Lower Manhattan, office or rentals or apartments, and basically they said, I didn't want to be in Lower Manhattan. So tell us about the UFT and the Resnick organization and your involvement on that.
It was a very interesting time, actually, and the UFT at that time was occupying 3 or 4 properties on Park Avenue South that were, to be honest, were pretty much dilapidated, and they were a growing organization under Randy Weingarten. And they were really just looking for incremental space. And my partner, Neil Lipinski, who brought me into the deal and got us going on the account, we were just looking for 50,000 extra feet in the neighborhood. Well, we were looking and looking and looking. We finally found something across the street, brought it to their chief executives, and they were like, you know what? We're going to now be in a 4th or 5th building. We said, wait a second, let's analyze what you have here, and let's see if we can find an alternate location. Maybe we can monetize all the buildings that you're in now, sell them to either a residential developer or an office developer, and then move you to a less expensive location. And maybe this could be a capital neutral deal. Well, lo and behold, we did. What we did was we found someone to purchase the 3 buildings. They converted them to residential, very successful residential buildings in 2002. This is early 2002. We went downtown and we purchased 50 Broadway from KBS, and we had to convince them to sell it, but it wasn't too hard because it was right after the 2001 aftermath. But we needed another 400,000 feet, which the Resnick family had adjacent. It was a building that was at 52 Broadway.
Okay, so the transaction was a double transaction.
It was a double.
It was 50 Broadway from KBS.
A purchase.
A purchase.
A net lease for 400,000 feet in the adjacent building that we broke through in the base to create all 700,000 feet that they needed. So we did about 300,000 or 400,000 feet of transactions in Midtown to monetize those assets, and we did about 750,000 feet of deals.
More important is, at this time, nothing was happening in Lower Manhattan. The Trade Center was down. The Class B office buildings nobody wanted to be in, and even the A properties were hurt, except for Battery Park City.
Chase was in 52 Broadway. They moved out, so that building was vacant. People were a little bit scared of downtown, and Randy Weingarten had the fortitude and the foresight to take the leap and go down there. And the weird part about it was that there was so much pressure on Randy from the mayor's office to announce a major transaction downtown. Well, we hadn't finished documenting everything, and you have to remember, we had 2 deals going. We had a deal to purchase 50, simultaneous with net leasing. If either one knew what the other one was doing with us, the pricing would go up. Well, we were in the midst of this negotiation. The mayor was like, I want to announce this thing with Randy on January, whatever it was. And we're like, you know what, let's at least get one of these deals done. We closed the 50 Broadway deal done, and we hadn't finished the deal with Resnick. We were just in negotiation on the lease when it was publicly announced. That firm did not change one economic term. And that tells you something about the families in this business.
Right, the families,
the real estate families in this business.
The real estate families of
the
New York
Resnicks, the Fishers.
are honorable people. They don't change
Very honorable
their
people.
deal.
And I got to hand it to Bert and Scott and the whole team for pulling through and doing that. That was pretty amazing.
Here's the interesting thing. How does, where did Cassidy Turley come around? You've been, my joke, as I said to you before, is you've had one job. The company,
well, I've had a lot of jobs with the same group of people.
No, you've
I feel like I got 10 jobs.
You've had many jobs. To elevate yourself to the chairman of the Tri-State region, plus a principal of Cassidy Turley.
Plus doing tenant rep,
right?
Plus having some managing the firm.
But how did Cassidy Turley come around?
Well, I guess in 2008, we started to realize that you really needed to bulk up to compete in this environment. And we were still just a boutique, not just, but a very profitable boutique firm in Manhattan. But all the competition is getting bigger and better, and the platforms are providing more service, and we realized we needed to grow. So what we did was we embarked upon a search for a partner. And we were part of Colliers International, which was a federation or a network of firms, but of individually owned firms. It wasn't a wholly owned entity. So what we did was we looked at several alternatives, and we decided to join partners with people that we've known for many years. The Colliers Turley Martin Tucker group in the Midwest, which had about 20 offices. The group in Washington, D.C., Cassidy Pinkard, which dominated the D.C. market. Colliers Pinkard in the Baltimore and Maryland area, and ourselves. And we put those 4 firms, which were Colliers partners that I've done business with for many years and trusted them, and we had the same culture and the same integrity in terms of the way we work. We merged them, and we were still under the Colliers banner for a very short period of time, because what we decided we had to do was to break away
A new identity.
and form our own firm with our own vision, make it a wholly owned entity. And what we've done since, in the last 18, we launched this thing in, I think it was March of 2010. In the last 18 months, we've bolted on 13 firms together. We now have 3,200 associates. We're managing 450 million square feet of space. And we've got 940 brokers. We're one of the largest, and we're probably the largest privately held firm in the country.
You know, you talk about associates, and that's a perfect lead-in, because one of the new associates is your son, right?
Yes, Brian Boisi, my
right.
son.
Now you have three. You're married. Your wife's name is?
My wife's name is Barbara.
And you've been married for how long? 30?
You're killing me, man. 32, 33 years.
Right. And so your son joined the company. You said
Brian joined the company about a year ago. He decided he wanted to follow in his grandfather's footsteps and, you know, his old man's footsteps. He's got the bug, and my other son is in real estate too. He's
right,
with the
but
development company.
he's with the development company.
Yeah, he wants to learn development.
His name is?
It's Paul Boisi.
And he's with
He's
Caldwell.
with Caldwell Wingate, which does a lot of work for stall development, and he's a project manager there, just finishing up a project on
And
the
then
Upper
you have a
West Side.
daughter.
My daughter Christine. She works at Hunter Boot Company in the fashion world, and you know, this is a kid that grew up in Manhattan. All my kids grew up in Manhattan, and they're pretty with it.
But you told me your son, you were trying to your son Paul, you didn't really want him to join this business.
Well, this was Brian.
Brian.
Well, Brian had, listen, you know the environment we've been in since 2008. The kid had a job. He was at a wealth management firm. He had a salary. And here he's saying to me, all the last 2 or 3 years, I want to quit and I want to be a broker on commission. I was like, Brian, I've done that. It's really hard.
But wait a second. As you said to me when we met, you've been on commission since 1976. You haven't
75 to be honest.
75. So you yourself have seen that the world is an interesting marketplace.
It's an interesting
But I think the real interesting thing is your mother and dad are alive, and
God bless them both.
we'll enjoy watching this show, because I think what we've given them is a story of the Boisi family. And
correct.
you know, and it's a great thing, and I'm really happy that the privately held company of Cassidy Turley has a great guy, a good shareholder, and a very good guy who's running the region over here.
Thank you, Michael. It's an honor to be with you.
And thanks for being here today.
You're the best.
Major support for these broadcasts is provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, GREENBERG TRAURIG, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, All Nation Renovation, Ackman Ziff Real Estate Group, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, Cassidy Turley, C.B. Richard Ellis, James ORPHANIDES, Centurion Holdings, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Eastern Consolidated, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Giantomasi, Goldman Properties, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. KUHN Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Corman Communities, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Newmark Knight Frank, RAL Development Services, The Spandrel Group, LLC, Site Comply, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Triangle Equities, the WITKOFF Group, Urban American.